let's kick this off. Let's get this started. Thank you for coming. Thank you for registering, for showing up on time. We appreciate you. Welcome to Doctors for Dancers, Education on Sexual Abuse for Teachers and Business Owners. Doctors for Dancers is an organization that connects dancers with medical and health professionals who are familiar with dancers' needs and the nuances when it comes to providing healthcare and medical advice to doctors, because, you know, we have specific needs. So you can check out the directory on www.doctorsfordancers.com, as well as events such as today's event. Additionally, we have recordings from previous webinars and Zoom events available on the Doctors for Dancers YouTube, so make sure to check that out, and the Instagram at Doctors for Dancers. I'm your host, Galit Friedländer. You can find me on Doctors for Dancers as a certified personal trainer. But today I wear a different hat. I'm hosting. And I wanted to say, and we're going to have our guests share this as well, before my life as a personal trainer, and currently I am a dancer first and foremost. I've been working as a teacher for over a decade, and I'm a choreographer for the WNBA Spark Kids. So I work with kids and teens in a professional capacity in addition to teaching. So I always have that hat on, and that's why today is extra, extra special. We also have our guests. So starting off, we have Leslie Scott. She's the founder of Youth Protection Advocates in Dance, YPAD, and it was born in the response and solution to various negative trends that commodify and exploit youth and adults in the performing arts. And Kim Pribyl is a youth advocate and prevention educator. She works with the Violence Intervention Project Incorporated and believes no one deserves to be beaten or emotionally or sexually abused. So before we start, again, we're here also as dance teachers, like this whole world that we're creating right now. So could we start with Leslie, and then Kim, could you just share a little bit about that hat that you wear as a dance teacher?
Sure. Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks, Galit. I so appreciate your intro. So as Galit said, I'm Leslie Scott, and I founded Youth Protection Advocates in Dance, known as YPAD. I've been a dance teacher for 31 years. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of decades. And I was in Los Angeles for about 20 years as a professional dancer. I was on faculty at Edge Performing Arts for 12 years, Millennium Dance Complex for 14 years. I have taught in 22 countries, which has been a huge blessing just to be able to see how what happens in America is permeating out to the rest of the world. And I am also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I'm a survivor of adult sexual assault, and I've also had a lot of experiences within the dance industry where I've been on the receiving end of sexual misconduct. So I know what it's like to go to the powers to be and to see how ill-equipped and complicit our industry can be when it comes to these types of issues. So I'm really grateful to Doctors for Dancers to share this space with them and with all of you today. And I look forward to the next 90 minutes.
Awesome. And wait, Kim, I may have not included this. I'm sorry. Everyone's so humble here, but Kim also was a police officer and educates other police officers. Yeah, so we have the whole spectrum here. Go on.
Yes, I have. Thank you so much, Leslie. I love that we all collaborated and pulled together. My obviously contact with Doctors for Dance is because I'm also a dance coach. I've been coaching at the varsity level for a few years now. Have been a dancer growing up and then competed at nationals, danced in college. But first and foremost, I've been judging though for the past since about 2006 around my state. So that's my background in dance. But yeah, my other side of the hat that I wear, you know, I have the mom hat, I have the coach hat, I have the former educator hat, as far as, you know, being, I should say former educator, but educating the police officers in sensitive crimes at a local college, and then also teaching in my community those boundaries and things that we're going to touch on here today, so I can reach out not only as a fellow coach working with it, but also on the prevention side.
Awesome. So we have a lovely presentation. Leslie, I'm going to have you kick it off, and also absolutely shameless plug, because you're going to hear these ladies and you're going to want to know more, and we're going to have more info. But Leslie recently was on the Dance Speak podcast. We have an interview with her. So if you want to hear more, please check it out as well.
Yeah, that was seriously such a great podcast. Thanks for having me on with that. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. As you already know, we're collaborating today. Kim, as she said, works for the Violence Intervention Project Incorporated. I'm here representing youth protection advocates in dance. And then our awesome host, Doctors for Dancers. I do just want to take a quick moment, even though I am the founder of YPAD. YPAD is now owned by Misty Lown. I am an advisory panel member, and I work with a very large advisory panel of clinicians, psychologists, doctors, research psychologists, advocates in sex abuse and other forms of abuse as well. So a lot of what you're going to be hearing today is actually research and work that they have collaborated on to present here today. So I want to kind of set the groundwork, because I can imagine and infer that coming on a training when we are dealing with a high stakes topic, such as sexual abuse in dance, it's not easy. So I just want us to really share a space here where we are all here to be learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. Maya Angelou's profound quote will live on forever, where she says, do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. A lot of the topics that we teach on in YPAD, I am passionate about, because I used to be on the other side. Even today, when Kim starts teaching about boundaries, there was times in my career where I did not have good boundaries. There's times in my career where I did not make the best choices. So we are not here to lecture you. We are here to have an interactive discussion, and to really just all hold space for each other, so that when we know better, we do better. The other thing,
I'm so sorry to interrupt you on that point. Just one moment. If you have questions that come up, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and you can also private message me, Galit, your host. And we're going to have Q&A at the end. So I'll filter through that. Just please try to refrain from having any discussions on the side, because it might keep you from being present. Leslie, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that was a good host interruption. Yes, yeah, that was important. So the other thing that is really important is that you take care of yourself. The content that we're going to go over today can be very activating for people. A lot of times it's, the word trigger is used. The word trigger can be a trigger, and we recognize that. But, when we hear and listen to what we're about to talk today, it could bring up memories or feelings or realizations. It can be uncomfortable. So if you need to take a break, please don't feel like you have to power, through. A lot of times, the first sign that something is happening, we're being activated, could be you start to get a headache or you have a stomach ache. These things can live in our body. So pay attention to that. We're going to record this. You're going to get a recording of this. So don't feel like you need to push through. I also just want you to just take a moment and write down a trusted friend. Right now, we're all here grounded and calm, and hopefully our nervous system is, in a really good space. And if a situation happens and you need some support, I want you to choose that person right now, so that you're not in fight, flight, or freeze, maybe if that moment might happen for you. So just take a second and write down a trusted friend, so that if you need some extra support to process the content today, that you have that there. I want to also talk about confidentiality. Normally, when we do trainings like this and it's not recorded, obviously everything that people share is confidential, but this is going to be recorded. So if there is something that you do not want to be shared in a public space, please do not share that publicly here, because anybody that watches that recording will also have access to that. If you write Kim or I or Doctors for Dancers or Galit privately, and you say, I want this question asked anonymously, we will absolutely respect your privacy. We really believe education leads to self-regulation. We are not here to call people out. We're here to call people in. And we know that education and shame, they cannot live in the same wheelhouse. So I just, really want to put out there to you that if anything today, and you're like, oh no, that situation did happen, and I didn't make a choice because I wasn't educated on what to do, welcome to being human, okay? Because all of us here have become advocates because we have been in your shoes too. So please just find that space to be kind to yourself. And also the last philosophy that I want to talk about for the session today is, what is a trauma-informed approach? We really try to be thoughtful about our language, about the tone in which we're talking about these things, inferring that there are people and participants on this call that may themselves be in a relationship or love someone who is a survivor of sexual abuse, and maybe you yourself are a survivor of sexual abuse. So we want to make sure that we stay trauma informed. An example of that is clinically in trauma informed, usually you use the words abuser and survivor, but also there is other things like research psychology, law enforcement, where words like perpetrator, victim might be more appropriate. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And this right here is an example of us making a best effort to be trauma informed. I would invite you to pull out your phone for a moment and snap a picture of these resources. This is only an introduction. This is such a nuanced, complex topic. There's no way we're going to be able to cover everything we need in 90 minutes. There is also a chance we might go over today. So if we go over today and you've got a hard stop at 90 minutes, please feel free to hop off and you can catch up on the rest on the recording. But we have the Violence Intervention Project here. They have a 24-hour helpline. This is the organization that Kim works for. I put their website. YPAD has also worked with Darkness to Light. They have a much more in-depth training that you can access for $10 at their webinar, at their website. YPAD has done a 2.5-hour webinar on this topic. And also we have a sex abuse module from our certification program that we have put on our website completely free. So you can access that on our website if you want to get a little bit deeper to these topics. And then there's a really wonderful organization that's been around for 60 years called Child Help. And they also have a 24/7 hotline that you can access if you feel that you need some support. This is for children, this is for parents, this is for uncles, this is for teachers, this is for anybody looking for support. So this picture is so perfect for the swim we're about to take here, because a lot of times with these topics, it seems like the obvious is on top. It's an iceberg, things that seem almost benign, things that seem like, well, that's not really a big deal. And sex abuse is one of those topics that underneath the surface of the water is a tremendous amount of I've used this word a lot, but complexities. And the other thing is they're interconnected. So sex abuse does not sit on a silo on its own island. It is interconnected with internet safety, with boundaries, with our developmentally appropriate artistic choices, with sexualization, with objectification. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a deeper look into the iceberg. Before we move forward, I want us to just all be on the same page on what even is sex abuse. So we kind of have to unpack the myths. Sex abuse, first of all, is identified as any sexual act between an adult and a minor or between two minors. So sexual abuse is not just an adult on a minor, and when one exerts power over the other. When we think of sex abuse, there are the obvious forms: incest, rape, sexual exploitation, sexual trafficking, violence. Obviously, there is sex abuse that happens with strangers, but a lot of times we don't consider non-contact sex abuse. I ran the sex abuse division at Youth Protection Advocates in Dance for 7 years. And we had many cases that the child and also the adult was very traumatized, and there was actually no contact between the abuser and the survivor. It happened through the online platform. So we don't want to ignore the fact that that is also considered sex abuse. I'm going to go through some really quick statistics. I just wanted to bring this one in the middle to light. 90% of sex abuse victims know their abuser. So this myth that we have that it's a man in a hoodie on the corner in a van with candy, the way that Hollywood kind of perpetuates these stereotypes of sexual assault is actually not what the data tells us. 1 in 6 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse, and 1 in 4 girls before they are 18. An example here is if you run a studio of 200, and let's just say 175 are female, 25 are male, statistically, there is a chance you will have 44 females and 4 males that will experience some sort of sexual sexual assault or coercion before they are 18 years old. We also need to really address, again, the fact that 40% of victims are abused by older or larger children, and also that the LGBTQ community is deeply impacted by sexual abuse. If we just look at this bottom data point, in 2015, the US Transgender Survey found that 47% of transgender people were sexually assaulted at some point in life. And then we also want to recognize that sexual violence is disproportionately, the data is disproportionately white participants, but that does not mean that sexual assault is not happening in communities of color and is not happening with dancers of color. I just want to point out the first data point here. For every Black woman that reports her rape, at least 15 Black women do not report rape. End Rape on Campus has a really robust database on the prevalence of survivors of color. So if you wanted to get a little bit more educated on that, you can dive into that there. I just wanted to look at the third data point here, that every year, Americans 12 years in age and older, 433,648 people experience sexual assault. And this is not even including the people that do not disclose and do not tell anybody. So it's also important to know the warning signs, right? We've kind of identified what is sex abuse, what are we talking about? There is a power differential, but really as educators and teachers, we are in such a privileged position. I mean, think about our competition dancers. Think about the fact that so many of these dancers spend more time with us than they do with their math teacher. Some of these kids spend more time with us than they do with their parents. So we're in a really privileged position to see behavioral changes, to see physical changes. So spotting sexual abuse in the dance setting, it can be difficult if you don't know the signs. But one of the keys to protecting children and to protect them from danger is understanding the signs. Now, any one warning sign does not mean this person has been sexually abused. That's actually not our job to determine that. They could have experienced another form of trauma. Maybe there's a divorce, maybe there's a loss, maybe there's addiction in the home. But it is really important for us to just be versed on these signs. So please go ahead and just take a look. I'm going to pull out a couple of them. One of the things is if you have a student who is normally really engaging, really extroverted, and they come to class and they're suddenly disassociated. They don't have the same cognitive abilities. Maybe all of a sudden in class, they're looking off to the corner and they're not able to focus and be present. So regressive behaviors can be a sign of trauma. For little children, if you start seeing them, suck their thumb, if they start to have excessive worry, or you're noticing that they become fearful, unusual weight gain or weight loss, 60 to 70% of sex abuse survivors end up forming some form of eating disorder. So that could actually be a way that they are expressing their trauma. Unhealthy eating patterns, a loss of appetite, excessive eating, obviously physical signs of abuse, depression, persistent sadness, not wanting to pay attention to hygiene. One thing that's really prevalent actually in what's happening right now with the pandemic is an inability to tolerate a face covering. So I run a survivors group that I'm part of here in the city that I currently live in, and about half of the survivors cannot tolerate a face covering because part of their assault was having either two sets of hands, two hands or multiple hands over their face. I have a student who is a survivor of sex trafficking from a very, very young age. So we obviously treat them like we would treat anybody else. If there was a child that has autism that cannot tolerate a face mask, a child that has sensory processing. So in keeping with our ordinances that does allow for medical reasons, we just do mitigating factors and make sure there's physical distancing, but we certainly don't shame or ostracize these sex abuse survivors because they cannot tolerate a face covering. Failing grades and also self-harm. We've worked with a lot of kids in YPAD that are expressing their trauma through self-harm. Drinking, drug abuse, suicidal ideation. And unfortunately, a lot of people who had been sexually abused do go on to commit suicide, especially when the trauma is unresolved. So the stakes are high. So let's just go ahead and go over some words of care. One of the things that we can do as studio owners and as dance educators is to really be thoughtful about what our communication regulations are at the studio. One of the things that we look at is out to the academic institutions, because as a teacher myself, I also don't want to put myself in a situation where a child or a tween or an adolescent has misinterpreted some type of communication I've had with them. them. So we really recommend that the studio owners or you as a teacher always have a caregiver or a parent, a guardian on the threads if you're going to be texting or communicating with a minor. It would be really weird and odd if your 12-year-old science teacher started to text them, right? It would be really weird if the 15-year-old's math teacher started to private message them on Instagram. So we kind of have these normalized boundaries in the academic world, but we don't have them in dance. So we want to think about protecting me as the teacher, protecting the minor, and also we're modeling to these kids what it should look like to have safe boundaries with other adults. It's not about the fact that I have nefarious intentions. It's also about the fact that this is a moment where I can model to these kids when they go to convention, when they're online, that this is actually not appropriate for an adult to all of a sudden private message them. So we want to normalize these healthy expectations up front. And it does. And again, this doesn't mean that that there's no exceptions to the rule, because you all know your dance studios better than we ever could. But this is something to really think about putting in your policies. So I'm going to now head this over to Kim.
Hi, thank you so much, Leslie. That was a lot of great information. It's a good segue when she's talking about the studio owners and reflecting those positive boundaries and having that thread and having a third party, having a witness. It's not too late to start these healthy boundaries now. But before I start on this section, I'm going to talk a little bit about a disclaimer that I like to do beforehand. Just like Leslie had said, that it's really important to talk and use proper language, whether you're using abuser, perpetrator, and some of these terms are used interchangeably. I want you guys to know too, if like I give a scenario, I'm not blaming one gender, one person, all parents, all studio owners. Like everything is, relative, right? So if I say, just because I'm saying she, it doesn't mean that boys are not assaulted. We know that it can happen to anybody. And terminology, for simplicity's sake, I might use these genders interchangeably. And so I might use male on male, male on female, but no way it intends to exclude any other genders or identities. So I'll try to use words such as victims or survivors or perpetrators or defenders. So I want everyone to understand too that all victims deserve a voice, and understand it can take time, years, and trauma and coping, and that this is a place of no judgment and no one is perfect. So we already had mentioned that, this is a safe space that we're getting into this. So, you may recognize some of our faults right now, and that's okay, as long as we are all willing to learn and grow from here versus reflect on like, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, I shouldn't have done that. Because again, no one is perfect, and each day I am still trying to get better each day as a coach when I'm working with my team to make sure that I am respecting their boundaries. I'm doing and teaching them the same things that they should be learning and, implementing in their own life. So you can go to the next slide. So when we're looking at boundaries, making sure that you go. Okay. So when we think of boundaries, we're thinking of like, out of bounds. Something is outside the line. We might think of football. We might think of volleyball, whatever that is, you're out of bounds. So it can be different when it comes to our own personal lives. So there's different types, whether it's your emotional, mental, physical boundaries. And guess what? Everyone is entitled to a boundary. So we may have different boundary levels too, depending on our personal experience. So my boundaries may look a little bit different compared to someone else that has lived a different experience. So an individual who's experienced trauma may have boundaries that are a little bit higher. I've seen it go the opposite direction. So you can't exactly put a label on someone's boundaries, but you know what? If they're saying it's a boundary, it's important to be respectful of that. So teaching these boundaries can start at a very young age. And it's something that we need to be, as parents, teachers, whatever role we're playing as adults, that we are respecting from a young age. So I give the example of, let's say you're at a family gathering and, I have a 5-year-old girl and I tell her to go give a hug to Uncle Carl because he wants a hug, right? And she let's say my daughter's like, no, I don't feel comfortable. And she's kind of got that, like, she's just not feeling comfortable with giving Uncle Carl, a hug. And I'm like, but you're going to hurt Uncle Carl's feelings if you don't go give him a hug. And her inner alarm system, her, alarm is telling her that's not comfortable with me. That's a boundary. And me as a mother, I need to respect that. Because if I go say, hey, go give him a hug, ignore that, rumble in your tummy or something that's making you uncomfortable, what is that teaching her for if she eventually gets to a certain point where there is an adult that wants to exploit her with that boundary? So it starts very young age. And another thing too, with our sexual boundaries, a lot of children are good at learning like what part of their bodies should not be touched, right? Safe and unsafe touch. That's, done at a young age. We have our, our swimsuit, like no other person should be touching those parts of our bodies, or looking at those parts of our bodies, unless if it's to keep us healthy and safe, right? So to make sure that those sexual boundaries are also being maintained. But then if we in the dance world are, touching their arms and legs and just going up and doing that, if we're not respecting their physical bubble right away, we want to make sure that we're respecting everything, whether it's not just their private parts, but then also they're respecting, if I'm a coach and I'm coming up, before I just go grab their arm, fix it and adjust it, or, asking for permission to be able to adjust those things. So
I have a question.
Everyone isn't, yep,
Sorry.
Go for it.
What if I've had the sense as a teacher sometimes that kids or teens, they're not always comfortable to maybe say what they actually think because they're afraid of like getting in trouble, or they don't want to be on a bad side or anything. So do you have any suggestions around that? Because maybe I would wonder if I asked in front of a class if a student would actually feel comfortable to be like, no, please don't. If I said, can I give you a correction? Yeah. Any suggestions?
So are you asking like me as a coach, or like how to get a student comfortable in order to voice their opinion?
Would they, and I don't mean it to challenge what you're saying, I mean it true, like, well, how would you recommend to ask a student if they're comfortable with a physical correction, knowing that a lot of the time, like I know my dance students, I can tell how much they're used to like pushing through and being a yes, or have you found that they are comfortable to be like, no, I prefer not, do you
I think my world's a little bit different too, because I'm more of like the teens and the scholastic side, and they're very comfortable with being like, no, don't do that. But okay. I think it comes on the side of, again, coming from the coach or the instructor, making sure that you are asking permission first. Because if they say no, and then if you're acting like, well, I don't care anyway, I'm going to do it, then, that's teaching them not to, respect their own feelings. So what I do, before I ask them, hey, before I can touch you, if they say no, I try to show them on my own body too. Like, okay, so instead of just, if your L is wrong, I'm in POMS. So if your L is wrong and you're adjusting, so show them on your own body. Or if you're like, tuck your pelvis in, be like, this is what I'm talking about. When you do it on your own body and you touch yourself, that sounds, but you're showing on your own body how to adjust their own. So that way they get that visual. But I don't know if maybe Leslie has a different experience and people not wanting to, students not wanting to like voice their opinion.
I've known dancers too, you'll see like, hey, you're limping. Is your ankle okay? And they're like, I'm fine. So I generally actually don't give hands-on corrections at this point, but I'm curious if that same dancer that's going to push through everything would actually be honest and say, hey, I'm not comfortable. Yeah, Leslie, what do you, I'd love to hear what you think or what your recommendation is.
Well, I think a lot of it is what Kim just said, but for me, I try to be as preventative as possible by communicating at the beginning, like, I care about your pain, I care about your comfort, and I invite you to communicate to me. Like, I want to hear from you. So I tend to be more of a guest artist. I am right now teaching in a local studio, but for the majority of my career, I come in, I will set a competition piece, teach some guest artist classes, or come in and do a convention, come in and, judge a competition. So I have spent a lot of, I mean, obviously at Edge Millennium, I was, on faculty there, but it's a very different environment than at a studio with children. So at studios with children, if I'm coming in and I'm going to spend a few days with them, one thing that I do is I say at the beginning, I want for you to come back for rehearsal, like when I usually have like a meet and greet or something to kind of break the ice with all of them. And I'd like for you to put on a piece of paper if you're comfortable with me giving you physical corrections, and everybody has to do it. So it's not like only the people that are not comfortable tell me. And I explained to them, like, I really want you to understand that you get to choose. This is your body. This might be my choreography, but when I leave here, it's going to be your choreography. And this is your body. And I do not have a right to touch your body if you do not feel comfortable. And I want to know from you what you need. And, usually I have had a few kids not participate, but usually they'll come back to the rehearsal and everybody will, put it in there. And while people are getting ready, I'll just go through, and I'm really good at learning names. It's just kind of because of being a guest artist, it's something I've picked up. And then I'll just try to really honor that for them, but I feel that it's so much more than that moment. It's a consistent setting the landscape of, like, I care about you past the dance. In YPAD, we have a hashtag, always put the dancer before the dance.
I love that. Thank you. And just to be clear, like, I'm always thinking, are they comfortable enough, to speak their true no? So,
but I think what Kim said is so powerful, though, because whether or not they are comfortable or not, because sometimes we can be amazing with creating a safe space and they still won't feel safe. The fact that we modeled that to them has currency. You know what I'm saying? Like the fact that Kim is modeling that and that we're modeling that is in itself a win.
Thank you.
I wouldn't say I'm not perfect 100% of the time. I'm like, point that toe, but like, it's a point of, again, like, I think it's preventative measures, doing what we can to have that safe space, so that way they do feel comfortable in vocalizing, so that way if they are dancing, and it's a fine line. It's such a hard thing to create, but here we're talking about, boundaries, like the sexual boundaries, and ensuring safe there, but those physical things, dancing on broken toes and sprayed ankles, and like, we've all been there, we've all done that, but there's a level of what is acceptable and what's not. So before I get into like these boundaries, so ensuring that us as teachers, instructors, we're modeling these healthy boundaries. And Leslie had mentioned using those platforms, always having another person observing conversations, having witnesses, whatever that may be, having preventative policies in place. YPAD has all those suggestions in place that like studio owners can go and take a look at. But then I also kind of want to touch base on the parents, because we probably see so many parents teaching their children to ignore their boundaries, their physical limitations, their maybe you might have a parent that's pushing their child to get close with that choreographer so they can get on a team and travel to other competitions and get in with that, and ensuring that you are I shouldn't say that, you are there to also protect them. We spend more time than some of those parents, again, so we may be that only lifeline to have a call for help and be that supportive mentor, and what is not acceptable. So Leslie had painted all those had painted a picture of what to watch for, but also to make sure that we are watching it from not only from like other dancers and boyfriends and parents, and how all those things can take an impact, because we want this to be their safe space, but guess what, all the other stuff affects our safe space. We got to make sure that we're watching for those things. So my experience from being an advocate, being an officer, especially with the littles, is that a lot of those behaviors and like the abuse comes out from like the child on child. So keep in mind, and those are little things to watch for, and be aware of what your policies are, whether or not you're a mandated reporter, to ensure that, you know, boundaries are being held and that that child is protected. So with that.
Thank you so much, Kim. We're going to hop through to grooming, and this is obviously very interconnected with everything that that Kim just shared. So what is grooming and how does it occur? So it's a process in which an abuser works to gain the trust of children and their caretakers, and you as a teacher could be looked as their caretaker. There's always going to be a power differential in place that is present, and very often these people are talented, successful, well-known, well-liked, charismatic, sometimes even famous members of our community. So one of the things that is interesting about grooming in today's dance culture that maybe wasn't true even 5 years ago is that now we have social media where dance has such a life online 24/7, and even more so during the pandemic, which in YPAD we like to call the Great Pause. Our clinicians are like, let's call it the Great Pause. It's less triggering. So during the Great Pause, kids are even online even more. So we want to think about when you as a studio owner or a teacher or a parent has shown up at a convention and that child, they probably already engaged with their social media brand on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, on, hold on one second. I'm so very sorry, on Instagram, on YouTube, and that can be a form of grooming. When YPAD a couple months ago did the 2.5-hour webinar where we had a very large panel, one of the guests on our panel was Wade Robson, and he's a survivor from Michael Jackson. And he really shared that by the time he actually met Michael Jackson, him and his family had already been groomed to not question anything because of the fame, because of the talent, because of the charisma, because of the respect. So we want to be thoughtful about how grooming can happen even before we might actually meet these people. So this, again, it's the perfect storm in dance, especially since dance is very unique. I mean, think about right now, if you have a child that loves soccer, they are probably not following a 14-year-old soccer celebrity. They're on Instagram, right? They're probably not following, you know, a 24-year-old football celebrity that has viral football videos. So it's a very different situation where the landscape in dance is really ripe because of the presence of celebrity in dance. I mean, and also when we come to parents, I think that, you know, Kim, kind of piggybacking on what I was talking about with parents too, is it's so important to see that sometimes it is the parents that are pushing the boundaries and not recognizing the behavior as grooming. So we want to be thoughtful about people who are coming in and trying to create a trusted relationship. And one of the things that can be confusing about grooming is that here we are as dance teachers where we may be actually behaving in mirroring ways, but have pure intentions. We don't have nefarious intentions. We want to, you know, the parent can't get the child to dance class. So we may say, oh, that's okay. I'll come and pick up the child, right? The child can't pay for something. And we might say, oh, you know what? I really want them to have the recital. I'll help pay for the costume. You know, there's all these things that we can do as very, you know, big-hearted, dance educators that for someone who has an impure intention could actually use those same tactics, but it's to gain trust and it's to create a power differential. So people who groom usually identify or target an individual, and they will identify someone who is vulnerable. So it could be a child or a tween or a teen that has low self-esteem, maybe somebody that doesn't have a support system around. They notice that, you know, their caretakers are not very involved. And then ultimately they are playing a really powerful role in that child's life. They isolate the child, their secrecy, and then eventually, this can happen in a short period of time, or this could even happen over years, that eventually then there's an initiating of sexual contact. It can be something as simple as when they are, adjusting them in dance and critiquing them, their hands are going in places that they weren't. Hey, come sit on my lap, giving a hug, giving a pat. So it can be something that is that on the spectrum can actually be gradual. And then in the end, a lot of times there is controlling of the relationship. Abusers will use tactics such as fear, shame, and blame. If you tell anybody, I will ruin your career. You were flirting with me. I did not initiate this. People will think that, using the term, people will slut shame you. I will tell everybody this is your fault, even to the point of threatening to hurt people that the survivor loves. So, grooming is something that we can recognize. We can see the red flags if we are educated about what the red flags are. So and I just wanted to say, I'm going to talk a little bit more about online grooming in my internet safety section, and Kim is going to take it back over and discuss consent.
Okay. So you guys, you can go to the next slide. I think the next slide should be yep. So when I have the W's of consent, it's like who, what, when, where, how. So what is consent? So we have informed, implied, legal, medical, but for the purpose of this presentation, we're looking at purely like the sexual and physical forms of consent. So who can consent? So we're looking at, as studio owners, as adults, what are we able to consent to as adults? But we're working with children. If we're working with children, we have to understand that when it comes to consent for sexual activity, that children do not have the legal right to consent. Make sure you're checking your state laws on that. But like for the age of Wisconsin, there's a lot of sexual contact that can't be consented to and as a child. But for the purpose of this, let's look at not necessarily the legal, like the age factor, but what it actually is. Like if you have two adults willing, free to be able to provide that consent. So it's an agreement which is clearly and freely communicated to engage in an activity, and a verbal and affirmative response expression of consent will ensure boundaries are respected. So, consent can't be given by individuals who are underage, intoxicated, or incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, or asleep or unconscious. If someone agrees to an activity under pressure, intimidation, or threat, kind of like what Leslie was talking about with grooming, that isn't considered consent because it was not given freely. Add the whole child factor into there. That's also a factor of, they're not looking, you don't have consent there. There's unequal power dynamics. So if you are a studio instructor and you're, pushing a child to beyond a boundary, there's some liability that you might be looking at as well there. So when it comes to children, youth, and teens, they have the right to set boundaries, even if there is a power differential. So when it comes to consent for sexual activity, most laws say individuals 17 and under cannot legally consent to sexual activity. The law was developed to protect children from perpetrators who targeted children because of the children's inability to fight back or understand that they are being victimized. So there's a level of understanding and conscientious about what is going on. Children are easy targets. We know that there's other individuals that are, I shouldn't say they're easy targets, but they're more victimized and more targeted individuals with disabilities. So in my experience, when it comes to individuals with disabilities, when I was in college, my first thought, individuals with disability, I'm thinking, right away, my brain goes to people who aren't able to walk, people who are, in particular types of classes and need a caregiver assistance. But this is also encompassing other individuals with mental health issues, included being the bipolar, depression. So individuals who struggle with mental health are also targeted when it comes to these types of things. So let's look at consent. Again, sorry, the when, where, and how. So you just have to, anyone who has the right to boundaries is the first step. Respect for boundaries can be implemented anytime, anywhere, with anyone. So given the person's background, say a teammate always posts pictures online of them with limited clothing, then another teammate posts a picture of the same girl in a similar way without permission and refuses to take it down. Is that consent? Did that person consent? No. So you have to look at the level of consent between not only physical, sexual, but then your online consent and internet safety, which Leslie will touch on a little bit on there. So if there was consent before, it does not automatically imply that there was consent and gives another person the right to post or share those same things. So the next video that we have, I just want you guys to understand that it's okay to laugh at this. I know that this is a serious topic, but I do believe that this video is very educational and paints a good picture, and makes consent not so gray. It makes it easy to understand. So with that, go ahead.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no, thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
Thanks for that. So I love that video. I show it to the teens in my local community for when I'm doing my prevention education. I show it to my law enforcement students. I think it paints a really good picture. It makes it simple, and that's why I love that video. But on that note too, I just want to also add, like, as a studio owner, like, how does this apply to you as a studio owner? How does this apply to you as an instructor? Like, if you're not violating these boundaries and you are getting your consent and you're doing your job, but you're also might be witnessing and having to be that third ear and teaching these concepts to your teens that are coming to your studio. Like, do you hear stories of your teens saying, like, how their boyfriend or girlfriend is continually icing them out for sticking to their boundaries? Like, let's say I've got dance, and all of a sudden it's like, you know, that you hear them complaining that their boyfriend's complaining that they're going to dance too much, and that dance is taking up their life. Is that person isolating them? Like, are they changing their decisions because of what that other individual is wanting them to do? So making sure that you're teaching these things, like the concepts that jealousy does not equal love, and that, you know, that control and isolation does affect them, and, you know, teaching them consent, whether you're the instructor, a parent, whatever it is, they need to know these concepts so that they, again, are growing up in a safe relationship.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate that, because this really kind of is an umbrella to everything we're discussing, right? I mean, even when it comes in terms of when we have that power to be able to make those decisions for our kids, that we can be the gatekeeper when the kids are not able to, maybe, you know, we talked yesterday on the webinar about how children don't have their prefrontal cortex developed until, some scientists say 25, but some say even maybe 29. And, you know, that logic and reason, we can't expect that they are always going to be able to, in the time that it takes when these situations happen, to make that best decision for themselves. And that's why it's important that we get educated so that we can kind of stand in the gap. So we're going to talk about sexualization and objectification. And, you know, this actually has a lot to do with this topic, because, you know, sex abuse, as I said earlier, is an interconnected web, and sexualization and objectification is on the continuum with sexual abuse. They are interconnected. Sexual abuse may be a more extreme form, but sexualization and objectification definitely sets people up. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Tomi-Ann Roberts. She on YPAD is our sexualization specialist. She has a PhD from Stanford. She's been studying this topic for 30 years, and she's the only researcher that we know of globally that is actually doing dance-specific studies. I'm actually working with her and her research team tomorrow for 2 hours to do another dance-specific study on sexualization. So it's really important, because one of the things with dance is that we are understudied, and I think the more we can become evidence-based, the more we can have confidence that we're making decisions that aren't just from, you know, viscerally what we feel, even though our intuition is important. But that we can really back up with science. So we have to look at what's the difference between healthy sexuality and sexualization. As hard as it is for us sometimes to realize this, children are sexual beings along the entire spectrum of their life, right? And obviously, as they grow, as they hit puberty, they're going to be expressing their sexuality as their development happens. But what's the difference between healthy sexuality and sexualization? So the APA is the American Psychological Association, and they actually did a task force report. It's the most most downloaded report of any report that the APA has ever done. And Dr. Tomi-Ann Roberts actually sat on that task force. There was 8 research psychologists in our country, and she was one of them. So sexualization is when one of the primary values of a person is their sexual appeal or their behavior. The other thing is also when there's a narrow standard applied, where we only say, this is sexy, this is beautiful, this is acceptable, this is what we applaud. The other stuff, we don't applaud that. We only applaud this. This is going to get the most hoots and the most hollers. And also, it makes people into a thing. So that's where objectification, where it makes people into objects that don't have a right to feeling. They don't have a right to express if they have a sprained ankle, if they don't want to do that style of choreography, if that music message doesn't feel comfortable to them. And also, it can happen when we inappropriately impose sexuality on a child, a tween, or an adolescent who actually is not trying to be sexual at all. Healthy sexuality, on the other hand, it's an interactive energy that motivates us to find love and contact and warmth and intimacy. It has mutuality, it has respect, and it actually is not about intercourse. So it's about it's free of coercion, it's free of discrimination, it's free of violence. You know, I shared yesterday that, you know, for me, healthy sexuality was my husband got off work to pick up my little girl and organized a babysitter so I could teach the webinar yesterday. Like that, to me, I'm like, you are one attractive husband. So it's very different. But one of the things that is not different about this is that sexualization of children, they don't recognize it. So us as adults, we have to be the ones in our artistic choices to consent to it. So Tomi-Ann actually developed the objectification theory. I just want you to look at the second point here. Objectification denies autonomy. I know all of you on here have probably at some point in your career worked for somebody who maybe objectified you. You know, you were just a body to get to the ends of whatever their artistic vision was. And it didn't matter if you had strep throat and you needed to stay home. It didn't matter if you had an injury, but you were denied the power of you being autonomy, for you to have a self-determination of what feels good for yourself. In the dance industry, we see ownership a lot. You know, this idea that people can be bought and sold. You know, we have a lot of language from this coming out of our agents in Hollywood. The denial of subjectivity, our feelings don't matter. This is absolutely connected to when that child has that moment when somebody might want to exploit them, whether or not they have the ability to recognize that and stand up for themselves. This is structural and cultural. We live in a society where we're prudish and also extremely hypersexual at the same time. You know, there's this idea that a breastfeeding mother is gross, but yet it's totally normalized that we go to the grocery store and before we check out, we're bombarded with half-naked magazine covers talking about orgasms and losing weight and all of these topics, and we don't even see because it becomes very desensitized. Interpersonal
Sorry, I know you're right in the middle, but I did want to ask you an applicable question to the dance room, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there's a couple of things that I've noticed in different places. Attire, teachers' attire and students' attire, not shaming or making it wrong or anything, but is there, you know, let's say if a student is showing up and their midriff is always exposed, or teachers, dance teachers, like, you know, wearing a sports bra, or your midriff is exposed, or you're wearing shorts. Is there a line or a boundary where it's maybe having a dress code? What are your thoughts on that? And when it's, because it's,
yeah. So YPAD, we have a certification, and inside our certification is for individual educators. A whole studio can become YPAD certified, or a parent can become YPAD certified. And we have a module on costumes and attire. And one of the things that's important to think about the midriff is my stomach is actually not a sex organ. Like my stomach in itself, there is not, it's like in my stomach, first of all, my stomach is an organ. It digests my food, but my torso has been sexualized by society through pop culture, right? Our kids get an idea that this is a good torso, this is a good stomach, and this is a bad one. And you show it only when it looks like this, and you cover it up when it looks like this. Tomi-Ann Roberts, Dr. Roberts, would also say that part of the exposing the midriff is in any costume. It's not about what is exposed, it's about what is covering up. What are we saying when we put a 7-year-old in a two-piece? She has no breasts. So what are we saying though when we cover up the top part? We're saying something's forbidden about this. Something is sexualized about this. When we choose to expose a young child who has no breasts, their stomach, but we choose to cover up other parts of the body, we are saying something about that part of the body, right? So I think that in terms of the intention, if I was to go jogging and it's 90 degrees outside and it's hot and I take my shirt off and I'm in short shorts and I'm in a bra top, because this is functional for what I am doing. It's healthy to not be hot. You know, it feels good. I want to feel the wind on my body. That's a very different intention than me saying, you know what? It makes me feel good about myself when I take my shirt off and I jog by the construction crew because they catcall me. And that feeds me. That you know, solidifies that my identity and my value is in what my body looks like and how I'm perceived in being sexually attractive. So I think, you know, the body is the body. And in America, Dr. Christina Donaldson, who's one of our psychologists, will say, we are very wounded in our sexuality. And we have become, you know, so to the point that, you know, we have, you know, sex is bad, sex is dirty, we can barely talk about it. And the body is the body, right? I mean, it's the same thing if I go out into the ocean, or if I, you know, want to show my body to be able to let the sunshine hit me. So I think that it's all about our intentions. And when we dress for dance and when we costume for dance, if we are costuming children to be more sexually attractive, that's not safe. That's not our intention. Costumes should first and foremost support the concept. It should have something to do with this concept. And secondly, they should allow the dancer to be so absorbed in the movement that they're not tugging at it and pulling it and making sure it doesn't go up their, their butt crack. They should be able to be so absorbed in the dance. So we've gotten in the dance industry this idea that the costume is only to enhance somebody's attractiveness. And that's a real dangerous message to give a child when we're trying to teach children how their body feels is more important than how their body looks. So if I didn't, answer what you were asking, please feel free to ask again. But, I know that this is a really nuanced and deep subject because it is. I mean, sexualization, objectification is not something that I could even begin to cover in this very short period of time I have here, but it's really important that we understand its interconnectedness to body image, to eating disorders, to sex abuse, to our sense of self, our self-compassion, our shame, all of that. It is connected.
Okay, cool. No, I appreciate it. And I completely respect that it's just such a bigger topic, but something to consider.
Yeah. And I think,
yeah.
Go ahead. So over here on the left, this happens in dance a lot where we sexualize girlhood. We see this a lot in the viral videos where we're piggybacking on this concept that the ideal sex target is a grown woman who actually has her toes pigeoned in and she's licking a lollipop and she's twirling her hair and she's in, the school uniform. This is concepts that I've even seen at competitions.
What happens when you have, I'm sorry, but like what happens if you have a teenager, right, show up in an outfit that's like a hair away from what you just showed on that top left-hand corner? Maybe their midriff is showing, like it's a similar look. They don't understand what's behind it. And it's not like so far out there necessarily to call home, but it's there in the dance space. Like, what do you do with that?
Most importantly, we don't ever want to shame somebody don't we understand why they would want to do that? Because in our society, children are getting praised for sexualizing themselves. It is the highest liked videos, the highest liked selfies are selfies where the person is self-sexualizing themselves. So we have to hold compassion that this is what they are seeing and they are emulating that. So we need to see what are they saying by doing this? They're just saying that they want to fit in, they want attention, they want to be seen, and they may be seeking, that phrase, like looking for love in all the wrong places. So they are being taught that they're by pop culture, by media, by magazines, by music videos, by commercials, that their greatest value, is to, excuse me, I won't say the word, but their greatest valuable is you've got two choices as an adolescent in America. You're going to either be effable or you're going to be invisible. And that, that is from a great TED talk on pornography. And it's so true, the messages that we're giving to kids. Like, you either need to be sexually attractive and sexually appealing or no one's going to see you. So I don't think it's about saying, hey, take off that outfit. I'm a big believer of dress codes. I think that they're cohesive. I think it kind of gets the brand and the fashion war out of things. So I think dress codes can be a really great way to kind of avoid some of that conflict within the studio. I think obviously our teachers need to be emulating, not self-sexualizing themselves. If a teacher is hot and they want to teach in a bra top, that's not my choice. This is your studio. And that's the reasoning. But if teachers are putting the emphasis on their aesthetic over their character, their relationship, but I don't think it's appropriate to tell the child to change clothes. I think it might be an opportunity to ask more, be curious. Hey, I've noticed that you're starting to show your body more. I was just wondering, like, what's the intention? What's that about? And one of the things that's really difficult, Galit, that we have to remember is that children's bodies change. A lot of the times when they're starting to show their body, then they will have weight gain because puberty hits. And that kind of creates a whole other body image crisis for them. But I think a great way to always approach things is to be curious, ask questions, and to have compassion for why children would self-sexualize, why children would self-objectify.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it does become self. That's kind of the nail in the coffin. This picture in the middle, work in progress, pointing down to her vagina, good to go. Every time that kids are seeing things like how to take the perfect selfie, or that we are dressing up little kids to look like pop stars, and the crowd goes wild. What are those messages telling the children? So we did an eye tracking device study where we looked at 18 highly sexualized YouTube videos that had 185 dancers, 124 females and 61 males. And we had a research team where we actually coded sexualized movements. I want to just look at this down here. Simulated masturbation was all over. It was completely typical that there would be children in a room that were watching the choreographers, do freestyle that was simulating masturbation. And then the kids would come out and then they would simulate masturbation. So, lip bites, smiling actually was almost non-existent. A lot of winking. We actually, Tommy Ann Roberts and I just looked at a video the other day where the choreographer was telling the minors to look at the camera as if it's a piece of meat and you have not eaten for days. So a lot of this is also us just being very aware of who we're exposing our children to. What type of what is the faculty like? Let's research the faculty at the conventions we're bringing our kids to. We're about ready to certify our first convention coming up here in December. The competitions, what type of pieces are getting the awards at competitions? Like Guidance Experience is a fully YPAD certified competition. All of the adjudicators have gone through the YPAD adjudicator training. They have preventative measures that you will be deducted for developmentally inappropriate artistic choices and also ultimately disqualified. So we want to be thoughtful about where we're taking our dancers, because we can certainly tell them what we think is healthy, but then they're also going to go to these outsourced venues and then potentially get mixed messages. So talking about it's important too. This is just really interesting, and then I'll keep going. But the average view of the most popular videos that used minors that had sexualized dancing in it, those codings, was 27.9 million. The same choreographer who did not use minors and it was not sexualized had an average of 2.2 million views. So this is something that if you ever go through YPAD certification or you watch that free webinar, Tommy Ann Roberts is amazing. She is so smart, and she actually presents this entire module and way more than this on that free webinar. She has a whole section on sexualization and objectification, and that's sitting free on our website. So one of the things about the eye tracking device study that was really interesting was the dilation of the pupils. If you kind of look over here to this left, where it was the highest sexualization and moderate sexualization, their pupil diameter was the most. Pupil diameter can obviously be a sign of multiple things, but one thing it can be a sign of an involuntary sexual attraction, anxiety. And what was really interesting was the implicit bias towards the dancer. The audience decided that the dancers, the children that were the most sexualized, actually didn't deserve to have feelings. They started to objectify this dancer. This is not perpetrators that are watching the videos. These were participants that were ages 18 to 60 from the Colorado college community that volunteered to be a part of this. So I think it's really important that there is something happening in our society among us to our brain wiring, that the more we sexualize children, the less we see them as fully human. The American Psychological Association's task force came to these outcomes, that sexualizing, objectifying children leads to eating disorders, including body dysmorphia, poor physical outcomes, more smoking, and low sexual assertiveness, and brain drain. They did this really important study where they had girls trying on bikinis and then try to take a math test, and they could not perform as cognitively strong on their math test because they were so into the shame that they were feeling in their body. So it is a brain drain. When our young people are so preoccupied with being beautiful, with being sexy, with being the ideal body type, they do not have the cognitive resources to do well in their academics. They don't have the cognitive resources to have the relationships or to be grounded in their bodies. And I think that that is something we have to really be thoughtful about, because that is a shame and we don't want that to happen on our watch. So let's just look here. People say, age appropriate is vague. And YPAD says, actually, no, it's not. Age appropriate is not vague. When you learn the signs of what is developmentally appropriate, whether it's costumes, it's concepts, it's music, it's moves, you actually can identify it. And you know what? Netflix did it for us, because here to the left is these girls that are happy and they're smiling and they've got, they're shopping and it looks like kids being kids. And that was the French version of the film, of the film's poster. And then here to the right, we see a very different photo of the exact same film. This is a perfect example of choices and how we have the power as creators to make different choices. Speaking of different choices, again, in YPAD, in our certification, we cover these four things: concepts of pieces, music, costume, and choreography. But Doctors for Dancers just wanted me to quickly address choreography and how sexualization and objectification of youth cannot be unenmeshed. When we sexualize children, we are inexplicably creating a landscape for them to start to objectify themselves. When we put them up on stage and they're using sex performatively and they are getting applause from behaving in highly sexualized ways, for being packaged in highly sexualized ways, we are teaching them to objectify themselves. We're teaching them a praise reward system. I just wanted to, I know this seems like, where did this come from? This doesn't actually go here, but I think contact improvisation is amazing. And I think it has so much artistic value. I think it is so much interpersonal value to be able to trust your peers in dance. But I just wanted to go back to kind of what Kim talked about with the boundaries and consent. It's just really important that you set up those boundaries and consent before you do contact improvisation. So we just make sure that we're respecting everybody's personal space. Music and the brain. This is Dr. Christina Donaldson. I mentioned her earlier. She did her doctoral dissertation on romantic love, music, and how it affects the developmental psyche of children. So she created our whole module on music for our certification. Bottom line, the number one thing that we need to know about music as dance teachers is music is education. Music is education, and it is teaching children about their identity. It is teaching them about minorities. It is teaching them about sex. It's teaching them about body image. It's teaching them about material things. It is absolutely education. So what are we teaching our children? There is direct messages, there is indirect messages, but one thing we have to think of is it is very different for a child to listen to a song that has maybe profanity in it, maybe it has a really mature message and they're in their room and they're dancing it out and it's speaking to them. That is a very different experience than us putting a concept on a child or a group of children, packaging it in a developmentally inappropriate way, and then putting it on stage to be assessed by others. Also, kids are listening to these songs over and over and over again. So what are kids actually saying about the songs that they're listening to? So we did a survey, YPAD did a survey where we had children write down, what do you learn from your music? We did this on a cross section of people all across the United States. And here is some of the feedback. A female who is age 14 said that she learns through her music at her dance studio that men cheat and lie. Being a boss and a bitch is a good thing. That was a female who was 12. This male who is 16, it is not cool to like a girl for her personality, but more if she is hot. Number 6, when I was little, my teacher called my class sassy jazz, but now that I'm older, I think sassy just means sexy because many songs we dance to actually say to be sexy. Female 14. Kids are not passive consumers. Here's some more that you can take a look at. But one of the things that Dr. Christina says is a really great way to determine our musical choices is print out the lyrics. Then imagine that child up on stage at recital, or they're up on stage at a competition, or they're up on stage somewhere, and they are going to read those lyrics out loud to an audience that we marketed as a family-friendly event. So there's going to be grandparents, there's going to be aunts, uncles, there's going to be younger children. If we feel good, if I'm like, that didn't bother me, that didn't give me a visceral, weird feeling to hear that child say those lyrics, and that child felt totally comfortable saying those lyrics, then we're good to go. Pick the song and it's great. But if that didn't feel good, maybe pick another song. There's so many other songs. And actually YPAD has a whole Spotify list if you want to check that out. So just, this is a really great closer here to this section from, again, Dr. Tomi-Ann Roberts.
So I just wanted to give a quick pause and connect it to something that's happening today. And I know we touched on it briefly yesterday, but right now, we have W.I.P as a hot song, and I'm seeing all of these different combinations to it. So what do you recommend to do, first of all, as a teacher, or studio owner, because I've heard this before, if a studio owner, let's say you have a really popular teacher and maybe they're playing this music, what's the best way to address it with them? Because we talked about yesterday about how the parental, side of it. And I know before I've heard of, I'm not saying this is every studio owner, but I've heard about them being afraid to offend the teacher in their artistic choices. So how can that be addressed?
Well, first of all, asking teachers who make a living off of children to change their artistic choices is not censorship. It's not policing it. We have to understand that by the fact that we teach children, we will have to use different methods. We're not going to put an 8-year-old on point, are we? Would that be healthy for them physically? No, we're not going to do that. So we have to be as mindful about the artistic choices, that they are developmentally appropriate for these kids. It's not about censorship. If you have this great idea for an S&M piece, great, do it on adults. That's not something that we would do on children. We would not bring 50 Shades of Grey into an elementary school for the book club, right? We wouldn't bring a completely nude artist into kindergarten class for our art class. We have to think through that lens. What is developmentally appropriate for these kids? And I think in terms of WAP, I really can't answer for everybody on this call how they feel about that. Personally, if I would not want a child reading those lyrics, I think it's very objectifying. I think it again puts a woman into this narrow definition of valuing them based off of a body part, not their character, not their spirit swag, not what they do to make the world a better place, not the fact that they hold a door open for a friend that's dropping their dance bag, all these amazing things that we could be focusing on to build children's self-esteem. So if we want to teach children that one of the number one ways for them to be empowered is use your sex appeal, all we're doing is we are grooming them to actually be targeted for sex abuse. We are grooming them to actually say, when that person wants to exploit you, you know what we told you in dance class? That's actually what you're good for. So we have to be thoughtful about the many other ways we can build children's self-esteem that has nothing even to do with their dance talent. It has nothing to do with their flexibility. It has nothing to do with their looks. It has nothing to do with their flat stomach. We have to build their self-esteem, and that is on the inside. So, I think that it's important that we have these conversations and not shy away from them. Me as a parent, and my little girl is in dance, I can either be quiet and not teach my daughter about sex, or Nicki Minaj can teach my daughter about sex. I can be quiet and not want to talk about penises and vaginas and music messages and drugs and violence and alcohol and racism and whatever it is, or I can go ahead and let the world teach her about it. So I think that it's really important as a parent, anybody on here that's a parent, and Dr. Christina Donaldson, who is our psychologist, is co-signing what I'm saying here, that we need to be willing to sit through these uncomfortable conversations. My sister's an MFT, a marriage family therapist, and she always is like, she's got 2 boys, and she's like, I'm freaking out on the inside, but on the outside, I'm cool as a fan. I'm just like letting, these kids tell me things, because the last thing we want is for kids to go underground or to feel like they're shamed and that they can't talk to us about these things.
Thank you. And just ladies, I want to be mindful. We have about 13 minutes left. So to everyone who's watching and listening, if you have questions, I'd like you to start typing them into the chat box, or you can type it to me and I will keep it absolutely anonymous so we could get that started. But so we basically have a couple of minutes to wrap up and then start with the questions. And I want to get an idea, gauge from everyone. Do you have questions? And we could start with those.
Yeah, please. I can't see the chat box since I'm running the slides. But my last thing I want to say about music is when we say they don't even understand what it means, Dr. Tomian Roberts will say, well, then why is that okay with us? Why is it okay that we are okay with children dancing to things that they don't even understand? Because it can have a greater negative effect. If they truly don't understand calling women the B word, glorifying orgies, saying that men are womanizers, all of these stereotypes that are happening in our music, if they really don't understand, then it just becomes filtered and it becomes normalized. They need to actually understand what's happening in the music so that they can be educated by it, because music is education. So that was my last point. I'm going to go ahead and hit it over to Kim, and she's going to talk about disclosures.
So I'm going to try to go over this pretty quickly because I want to leave some time for the Q&A. Although that this is one of the number one things you can do and listen to support a person who has been a victim or has experienced sexual abuse.
Kim, I
Yes.
can just have them post one of our internet safeties, and I can skip my whole internet. I mean, I know that Doctors for Dancing said that we could go 15 minutes over, but I can skip my internet safety module, and we can just send out a document for them, because this is so important. How to take a disclosure is crucial.
Right. So, as a studio owner, first of all, I want to say thank you for being here. If you're an owner, teacher, instructor, coach, first of all, thank you for being here. A lot of people won't take the time of day to learn this part. You'll spend all of your time and helping prevent injury by, not pushing an athlete too far, but then we don't look at this whole side of it. When it comes to victimization, and the number one part of healing and recovering and having a reduction of trauma is in taking a proper disclosure and taking this report and how you move forward with that. So the first and foremost thing is believe, you're taking this disclosure, you're not being judgmental. I know it's going to be probably very, very tough as a studio owner. This is your livelihood. There's might be liability attached, whatever it is, but take into consideration that, one, if this student is coming and telling you something, they're doing it because they trust in you. It's not easy to come forward to make a claim on this. We know how the media targets victims. There's, in reporting this whole thing, there's re-victimization, you're getting re-traumatized, you're being questioned, you start questioning yourself. There's so many things that are going through a victim. So the fact that they're coming forward to you, take some ownership in that, and take some that you had an impact on this child's life. So when they're coming forward, thank them, and for the courage to come forward. That's one of the number one things we do in our job, is when a person's walking in through our doors, we're thanking them. Guess what? It took you a lot of courage to do this, and I am very proud of you, because they don't hear that, and even saying, I am sorry this happened to you. I'm here to listen and to support you in whatever way that is. Another thing to do, ensure that you are supporting them through that process. You may not have all the resources. You may not know all the answers. That's okay, but you're providing resources, and understand that every single one of you have advocates, whether it's, YPAD, having someone specific to dance, or having someone who works in it, like me, day to day, working with children who are victims of crime. So everyone has advocates in their area that are specific and know the resources in your community. So in my community, I'm in a very rural community. So we don't have as many resources and agencies as others. So, I work with domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, physical abuse, bullying. We're doing so many different things to encompass a lot, but you guys might have someone specific to sexual abuse in your area. So understand that there is more to it, and more resources that are out there, and providing that soft transition to support that student through making a disclosure. When I say, make sure that you're not being judgmental or questioning. So we understand that as dancers, we're very expressive, and, you might hear something shocking or terror. Ensure that you're trying to do what you can to control your emotions, and that way you're not looking at them in a parental look. We know the parental look, so that you are they are perceiving that you are open to that. Another big thing too, I had geared this towards parents before, to ensure that, as parents, you might be asking who, what, when, where, how, and, I won't lie, when my daughter comes up to me and she's really quiet, and she's got her hands behind her back, and you just want to be like, what'd you do? Ensure that we're not doing that with our teens too. We're not blaming them for getting themselves in this situation. I told you not to be messaging him, or I told you not to be going one-on-one. I didn't trust that person. That you're not. So that's kind of coming from the parental side. But as studio owners, teachers, instructors, we can't be blaming that child, because first of all, they're a child. It's not their fault. And secondly, there's grooming behaviors. It's not their fault. So understanding that. Ensure that you're not silencing them. So, if you're telling them if they want to share their story, that's up to them to share their story. It's up to them. And work with your legal team at your studio if it has something involved in that. But we shouldn't, it's not our responsibility to be telling their story, or so maintain their confidentiality. And it's also not our responsibility to be silencing them. But the number one thing too, and this is coming from my police law enforcement hat, ensure that we're not interrogating or questioning, because when it does come to a report that you have to bring it to investigators or to law enforcement, we don't want to be that witness that compromises the investigation. So there are proper ways to do it. So take the initial disclosure, have that person report it, the child report it to their proper authorities, but it's not our job to question who, what, when, where, how, because one, we may not do so in a victim-centered way because we're not trained on that. We're not trained on, trauma-informed interviewing. The second thing is, it could compromise because with an individual who has experienced trauma, memory is impacted, and we could go into how that impacts like the development of the brain and how, the hippocampus and the amygdala and everything and the cortisol levels all affect memory. But we're not going to do that. Just understand that it's not our job to question, but to support and make the proper referral. So that way, if they do choose to, report it to the proper authorities, that the investigation isn't compromised. So that way that perpetrator can be brought to justice. And that, and sometimes that's ultimately what that victim wants. Just because we don't understand, if a victim's like, I don't want to move forward, even though you might see like, oh, that person needs to be held accountable, it's not up to us to make that decision. It's up to the individual, and that their experience, whether or not they want to move forward in holding their perpetrator accountable. Okay.
Awesome. Is that it, Kim?
Yes, I think I'm trying to make sure that we're all on good time. So
yeah.
Awesome.
So I have a question from one of the participants. So, and this is for both Kim and Leslie. One of you can answer, both of you can bounce off. So right now we're in the time of Zoom and getting virtual lessons, and the buffer time that students and teachers normally have to connect after class and to chat, it's kind of cut out. So is there any way that you would recommend where, a student can feel supported by their teacher, but because it's all virtual online and maybe the student is like alone in the room, is there a comfortable way to still keep the lines of communication open, but also that the student can feel supported by their teacher outside of the official exact class? And does that make sense, the question? Like normally the post-class hangout where like parents are there, students are there, teachers there, you're talking, it's now cut out and it's all on Zoom. So is there a way to safely still have a little bit of that?
I know that I was just going to say at our studio, it's scheduled.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Like you have a, cool.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say tea time, but that's like not the right wording. But,
so
yeah.
I was thinking like if there's a time that a student wants to hang out or whatever, I would have something pre-scheduled, or make sure that you have another individual that is, I don't want to say it, like an assistant that is also observing the conversation and how those things happen. But, and recording things, that's such a hard thing to do, because like on one hand you want to give them permission or give them, hey, by the way, this is recorded for everyone's protection because we don't have as many witnesses, but then again you're also with a student, so it all depends on what that looks like, and what activities you're doing and information that's getting shared if you are recording things. I don't know if I just went on a tangent there and opened a bunch of other questions, but
no, I think that at ours, my daughter's studio is a YPAD certified studio. And we as parents, since when things went online, my daughter's back in person right now, but when they were online, we actually had to sign something that said that the Zoom is going to be recorded. But I really understand the conundrum, because first of all, nothing's going to take the place of that human interaction, right? Evidence-based research shows us that eye contact does the mirror neurons, and we can feel each other, and the empathy is there. Like, we're just not going to get that here. So I just think making those little efforts to either, even have a 10-minute earlier, do one every couple times a week, and do a special hangout where there's no dance and it's just actually connecting. I think that those things sometimes can be even more important than learning the moves.
And then, thank you. And then also, what about, and this can apply to now and then also in general, if the student wants to reach out to the teacher, if the teacher is like, hey, I'm available to you, or you want to be available to your students, part A, is there a way to have that appropriately offered in this time? And part B, in general, especially if you're working with older teens and you're like, hey, always I'm here to support, feel free to reach out to me for anything. Is there a way to have that appropriately set up? Do you get what I'm saying? So that they can reach out if they have any questions and yeah.
So I'm thinking, I'm also in a different world too, because I'm not studios, I'm not private. I went through background processes. I've been through all this stuff. So a lot of those preventative measures and hiring the appropriate people and instructors who are not going to be grooming and perpetrating against students is important. So like, I want to say, like, if we could rewind and live in a perfect world, we'd be hiring and everyone would be perfect, right? And that, every instructor would maintain those boundaries, those professional boundaries. So hiring the right people. But I think also utilizing the right platform of reaching out to those individuals, where if it's on through an app like Remind, Class Tag, Band, whatever it is, so that way if it's not coming personally right into your phone. I know it's a hard thing for students to like transition to sometimes, like if they want to reach out to a coach or if they have a concern, they're just like, I'm just going to text them. But it's making sure that you do what you can to have all those communications. If you want to reach out to me, make sure that you're doing so through band, is, so that way everything, I don't want to say is monitored, but that way we can have a history of our communications. It keeps everyone safe.
Is email better if your studio isn't set up with apps? Is email better than text?
I would say so, because there's a lot, there's tracking no matter what you do. Let's think about it that way. In the investigations and you're downloading phones and everything like that. But I just think that, but again, you don't want to set a barrier for a student who wants to, needs to reach out to somebody either. So
yeah,
a lot of students aren't going to be emailing, they're going to be texting. So doing what you can to make sure that you're protecting yourself, so that way, those conversations are monitored, or however that may look. I don't know, Leslie, do you have anything to add on that?
Other than it's tricky because, especially with kids being home right now, there is, I think, reliable data that there is an increase of domestic violence and there's an increase of sex abuse. And we want to be a person that child, if it is happening within the home, that they would disclose that to us, so I think, I think that it has to be a balance. And I would say that, we can't be absolutists on anything. I think ideally, if I'm emailing or texting or whatever with a student and it's about a private, or it's about choreography, or even it's about, hey, I want to chit chat. Like I've been teaching some sessions because normally I travel. And instead I've been doing like 8-week Zoom sessions and, doing, I'm a guest artist. And I've had some people that want to communicate with me. And so me and the parent and the student have just said, we will do it on email. I'm going to copy your parent, but your parent is not going to, they're not going to come in here and helicopter it. You know what I'm saying? But I'm very honest with my students that if you share something with me that makes me concerned for your safety, I want you to know that, I may have to share it with your parent. Obviously if they share something that's from the parent, I'm not going to do that. But so I've tried to be really preventative and just be really communicative on the front end. And I think that there's a way to do it because I think we need it. We desperately need it. But for me personally, and this might just be my hypervigilance because I've seen so many things go sideways in these ways, I personally would not if a student texts me and there was not a person on the thread and the content was like, I get why they're texting me personally, because something's happening and they're reaching out to me for help. That is very different than them just text me and being like, hey, I really miss you. I'm just wondering what you're up to and da 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 da. I would then say, hey, I love the fact you want to talk to me. It makes me feel like a rock star and feels so good. But I also just want to remind you that as you being a minor, me being an adult, I'm going to model to you, we've got to get an adult on this thread. And I would just say and I'm like, this isn't because I don't love you. This is actually because I do. You know what I'm saying? It's because I actually do really care.
Thank you. And then we have one last question, and just everyone listening, we're going to have, the time is TBD, but next Wednesday, we're going to have an IG Live takeover so you can ask more questions. And the last question I have, if I hope I understand it correctly, or do you know of any apps that prevent kids and teens posting adult-like photos? If it's like a photo that looks like it could be on Sports Illustrated or something, are there any apps that prevent that, or?
I know of a lot of apps that will do like parental settings and controls to be able to help monitor what information is coming in. But in terms of what kids are posting with their photos, and by the way, Doctors for Dancers is going to do a photo of internet safety tips for teachers, parents, and dancers. So they're going to post that. That was part of the section we didn't get to today. And it's just some really good common sense things, and monitoring social media is part of that. I mean, I work with a lot of YPAD certified studios, and they actually have people monitoring their dancers' social media, not because they're trying to be super sleuthing for a wrong reason, but they also just want to make sure that their kids are staying safe online. So, I mean, we've had situations where, teachers have gone and said to the parent, like, hey, I love so much that you want to post that we were at the convention. I love this, like, wow, this means so much to me. But next time, let's not put at so-and-so location. Let's not put da 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 da. So we're just really teaching these kids how to post safely, healthy social media management.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what the question was getting at. How can we teach these kids not necessarily have an app to prevent it, but in order to teach them it's not acceptable to be posting those images in the first place of themselves. What is that doing to you as a child when you're posting yourself and doing these pictures, and you're posting, you're 15 years old and you're posting yourself as a sexualized way? How can we, us as coaches and teachers, I think it's about setting the bar and like having representing a healthy sexuality ourselves, but then teaching them from a young age what that online medium should look like. Like, how are they posting themselves?
Oh my God.
Dancers need to understand that there are online predators that have caught on how to target the vulnerabilities of dancers. I mean, I've worked on many cases, and this is just the truth. And we can understand why they want to post that sexualized video, that photo. We get it. But I mean, I teach media literacy, and I think that is one of the best ways. Is we don't want to tell kids, don't do this, because you know what, Psychology 101 is going to they're going to want to do it even more. We need to teach them the why. And when they come to the why on their own, why are you doing this? Is there a better media footprint for you to put out there? Remember, you're an influencer. You are influencing the 13-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, because they're all looking to you. Is this, think about how you are a role model. So there's a lot of ways we can have these conversations, and at the forefront of it, always holding compassion for their why. Like, they want to be liked, they want to be affirmed, they want likes, they want followers. This is what our culture is saying is valuable.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Doctors for Dancers. Thank you for everyone who came today. We know that, it can be triggering. It takes a lot to show up. And this is a conversation that I hope becomes more normalized, so we can continue all growing and we can all continue to get continuously educated. So thank you again for attending the Doctors for Dancers education on sexual abuse for teachers and business owners, and have a wonderful day.